The sky above our capital was on fire when my father told me I would be married by morning. I remember gripping the balcony railing so hard my claws left marks in the stone, watching 3 of our warships fold into burning wreckage as Kryn strike fighters tore through our last defense line. Alarms screamed through the palace halls. Servants ran past me carrying nothing useful, just moving because standing still felt like dying. I was the heir of the Sevri Dominion, trained since childhood to lead fleets, and in that moment I could do nothing but watch my people burn. "Alina," my father's voice cut through the noise behind me. He looked older than he had that morning. "The council has voted. We are done fighting a war we cannot win. So, we surrender to the Kryn." I turned on him, disgusted at the thought. "You would hand them everything we have built?" "No." He stepped closer, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in his eyes that wasn't about the war outside. It was about what he was about to say. "We are not surrendering to the Kryn. We are allying with the humans." I laughed. I actually laughed, in the middle of a burning sky, because the idea was so absurd. Humanity was a species barely a decade into contact with the wider galaxy, a people other empires still debated whether to call primitive or simply lucky. We had exchanged a handful of diplomatic messages with them. We knew almost nothing about their strength, only rumors, half of which sounded like myths told to frighten children. They have offered fleet support, resources, and a formal defense pact, my father continued, ignoring my laughter. In exchange, they want a bond between our houses, something permanent, something the Kryn cannot dismiss as a temporary agreement. A bond. My stomach turned cold before he even finished the sentence. "A marriage, Alina. You to one of their people." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. I had commanded ships. I had watched soldiers die under my orders and carried that weight without breaking. But this felt like a blade slipped quietly between my ribs while I wasn't looking. "You would sell me to strangers to save a war effort," I said, my voice flat and dangerous. "I would give you a chance to survive it," he said. "The Kryn will not stop until our bloodline is gone. This is not a sale. It is the last card we have left to play." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to remind him that I was a warrior, not a bargaining chip, that I had earned my place at the head of our fleets, through blood and discipline, not through the shape of my body or the value of my name in a marriage contract. But another explosion lit the sky outside, closer this time, and the sound of it swallowed every argument I had left. By dawn, I was standing in a private meeting hall aboard a human transport ship that had somehow slipped past our battered defenses without a single alarm going off. That detail alone unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Our sensors were not weak, and yet this vessel had entered our most protected airspace like it was walking through an open door. The room was small, plain, almost insultingly simple for what was supposed to be a historic meeting between 2 civilizations. No golden banners, no ceremonial guards lining the walls, just a long metal table, a few chairs, and a handful of humans standing with the kind of stillness I associated with soldiers who had already decided how a fight would end before it began. Then he walked in. Corin Ashworth was not what I expected. I had built an image in my mind overnight, some soft diplomat with practiced smiles and empty promises, a man who would need protecting more than I would. Instead, I found a tall, quiet man with tired eyes and rough hands, dressed in a simple dark uniform, with no medals, no rank insignia I recognized, nothing to announce who he was. If I had passed him in a crowded market, I would not have looked at him twice. And yet the humans around him did not act that way. They straightened when he entered. They lowered their voices. One young officer near the door actually stepped back half a pace, as if giving him more room than his body required. "Princess Alina Voss," he said, his voice low and even. "I am sorry it has to happen like this." Sorry doesn't stop a war, Ashworth. I kept my chin high, refusing to let him see how unsettled I already was. Sorry doesn't rebuild what your allies are about to make me sign away. Something flickered behind his eyes, gone before I could name it. "No," he agreed. "It doesn't. But it's still true." I studied him carefully, searching for the arrogance I expected from someone whose species clearly held enough leverage to demand a royal marriage as the price of an alliance. I found none. What I found instead was a strange, quiet weight, like a held breath, like a man who was tired in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. "You do not look like someone who commands armies," I said, testing him. "I don't command anything," he replied simply. "Not anymore." I did not understand what that meant. Not then. I filed the comment away with dozens of other small, strange details from that morning. The way his own soldiers avoided standing too close to him without seeming to notice they were doing it. The way an older officer near the back of the room would not meet his eyes at all. The way the word contingency passed between two humans in a hushed voice before they noticed me watching and stopped talking entirely. My advisor, Talia Bryn, leaned toward me as the humans stepped out to prepare the next part of the arrangement. "Something is wrong with this alliance," she whispered. "They agreed to send only one representative for the marriage bond. One. No honor guard fitting his supposed importance. No fleet escort visible on approach." "Maybe he is not important," I whispered back, though even as I said it, I did not believe my own words. "Then why does an empire negotiate an entire war's fate around convincing us to marry him specifically?" Talia's eyes narrowed. Out of all their people, they chose him. I had no answer. I only had questions, stacking quietly on top of each other, and a war outside that would not wait for me to solve them. When Corin returned to the room alone, he carried a single data tablet, plain and unremarkable, containing the terms of the alliance. He set it in front of me without ceremony. "You can read it yourself," he said. "I won't pretend it's simple, and I won't pretend you have many other options left, but I want you to know something before you sign anything." "And what is that?" I asked, bracing for some hollow diplomatic reassurance. "I didn't ask for this marriage to control you," he said, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "I agreed to it because it was the only way my people would let me get close enough to actually help yours." I laughed again, though quieter this time, more disbelief than mockery. "Help us? A single man, unarmed, unranked, with no visible fleet behind him?" He didn't answer that. He only looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, something between apology and resolve, and said, "You'll understand soon enough." I did not know, standing in that small gray room with the weight of my dying empire on my shoulders, that those words were not a diplomat's promise. They were a warning. Before we left that meeting hall, an older human woman approached me, introducing herself only as an aide to the delegation. She spoke quietly, almost kindly, though her words carried an edge I did not understand until much later. "Whatever you think you agreed to tonight, Princess, understand that our people did not send him lightly. Every choice we make about him is deliberate. Nothing about this marriage happened by accident." "You speak as though he is dangerous," I said, studying her carefully. "I speak as though he matters," she replied, "more than any single treaty could ever properly explain. Take care of him, Princess Voss. Not because he needs protecting in the way you might expect. Because very few people in this galaxy ever get the chance to see him as anything other than what he can do." I did not understand her meaning fully. Not then, though the words stayed with me long after she walked away, another piece of a puzzle I had not yet realized I was assembling. I signed the agreement anyway. What choice did I have? Outside, our cities were burning. Inside, a stranger with tired eyes was watching me with something that looked almost like grief, as if he already knew exactly what our marriage was about to cost him and what it was about to reveal to me, long before I understood any of it myself. That night, alone in the small cabin they gave me aboard the human ship, I stared out at the stars and wondered what kind of species would offer up one of their own so easily to end a war they barely had any stake in. I told myself it was simple politics, a calculated trade, nothing more. I was wrong. I just did not know it yet. Somewhere down the corridor, I heard two human voices speaking low and fast, careless with the belief that no one else was listening. "Do you think she knows what she just agreed to?" one voice asked. "No," the other answered, None of them ever do, not until they see him. I lay awake long after the voices faded, turning those words over and over in my mind, and for the first time since the war began, I felt something colder than fear. I felt the creeping, unshakable sense that I had just stepped into something far larger than a simple alliance, something I did not yet have the language to understand, and that the quiet man with tired eyes sleeping somewhere on the other side of this ship was not the peace offering I had been promised. He was something else entirely. The wedding took place on neutral ground, a shared colony station built specifically for this fragile new alliance, halfway between Sevrai territory and the edges of human space. I had imagined, growing up, that my wedding would happen in the great cathedral hall of my ancestors, surrounded by centuries of tradition, my family's crest carved into every wall. Instead, I stood in a converted docking bay with metal floors and temporary decorations, surrounded by representatives from two species who barely trusted each other, waiting to see whose customs would win the room first. Talia adjusted the ceremonial wrap around my shoulders, her hands trembling slightly. "You do not have to smile," she murmured. "No one expects you to be happy about this." "I am not worried about smiling," I said. "I am worried about everyone in this room deciding to start a fight before the ceremony even finishes." She was not wrong to worry, and neither was I. On one side of the bay stood our delegation, proud despite our defeat, dressed in formal armor plating polished to reflect every light in the room, a final display of dignity before an alliance none of us wanted. On the other side stood the human delegation, dressed far more simply, watching everything with the careful, measured stillness of people who had rehearsed every possible way this event could go wrong. I noticed immediately that their formation was strange. In every alliance ceremony I had studied, the most important human present would stand at the center, surrounded by guards, elevated somehow, marked as significant. Instead, Corin stood slightly apart from the others, almost at the edge of the group, while a cluster of officers stood closer to the center, as if deliberately drawing attention away from him. I leaned toward Talia. Why do they hide him at the back? She studied the arrangement for a long moment. "I do not think they are hiding him," she whispered. "I think they are protecting everyone else from standing too close." I did not understand what she meant. Not fully, not yet. But a cold thread of unease settled into my chest and stayed there through the entire ceremony. The Sevrai rites came first. An elder from our court recited the old words, binding oaths meant to tie not just two people, but two houses, two futures, together. I repeated them by memory, feeling strangely distant from my own voice, as if I were watching myself perform a role in someone else's story. Then came the human portion, unfamiliar and plain, a simple exchange of vows written specifically for this occasion, since our two cultures shared no common tradition to draw from. When it was Corin's turn to speak, he did not read from a prepared script the way I expected. He looked at me directly, his voice steady, despite the weight of every eye in that hall. "I know this isn't the marriage either of us wanted," he said. "I know you didn't choose me, and I didn't choose this war, but I am promising you this. As long as I am able, nothing that comes for your people will reach you without going through me first." It should have sounded like an empty vow, the kind of dramatic promise diplomats made for the sake of ceremony and nothing more. Instead, something about the stillness in the room when he said it made my skin prickle. I glanced at the human officers standing near the center of their delegation and saw several of them look down at the floor, as if his words carried a meaning heavier than any of us outside their species could grasp. After the ceremony ended, a formal reception followed, awkward and stiff, both delegations circling each other with polite words and careful distance. I found myself standing near a group of human officers discussing something in low voices, and I allowed myself to drift close enough to listen, curiosity overriding my sense of propriety. "If the Kryn try something during the transition period, Command wants the contingency plan ready," one officer said. "You mean the collar protocol?" another asked, voice quieter still. "That's not officially the name anymore," the first replied, "but yes." If he has to step outside containment procedures during a diplomatic event, command wants eyes on him at all times. No exceptions. I froze where I stood, pretending to study a nearby display of ceremonial gifts while my mind raced through what I had just heard. Containment procedures. Collar protocol. Words that belong to descriptions of dangerous prisoners, not honored representatives at a wedding. I searched the room for Corin and found him standing near a window, alone, watching the stars outside with the same tired expression he had worn when I first met him. Earlier, during the reception, I had also noticed something else strange. A young human soldier, barely more than a boy, had been assigned to stand near the edge of the room with a small device clipped to his belt, watching Corin with unwavering attention the entire evening, never once relaxing his posture, even as the rest of the gathering grew looser and more informal. When I asked Talia about him, she admitted she had noticed the same thing and had no explanation for it either. It was one more thread pulling at the edges of a picture I still could not fully see. I approached him carefully, unsure what I intended to say. "Your people speak strangely about you," I said finally, choosing bluntness over subtlety. He turned to look at me, and for a moment, I thought he might deflect the comment entirely. Instead, he simply asked, "What did you hear?" "Containment procedures," I said. "Collar protocol," words that sound like they belong to a weapon, not a husband. Something in his expression shifted, not surprise, but a kind of resigned acceptance, as if he had known this conversation would happen eventually and had simply been waiting for the moment it arrived. "It's not something I can explain easily," he said. "Not tonight, not here." "Then explain it somewhere else," I said, refusing to let the subject drop. "I did not agree to marry a mystery, Ashworth." "No," he admitted. "You agreed to marry a peace offering. That part is true, I promise you that." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. But peace offerings are rarely simple things. Sometimes the quietest gift is the one capable of the loudest damage, and the people who send it know that better than anyone. I wanted to press further, but the reception demanded our attention again, pulling us both back into a whirlwind of formal introductions and careful diplomatic conversation that left no room for private questions. By the time the evening ended and the guests dispersed to their quarters, exhaustion had settled deep into my bones, though sleep felt impossible, with so many unanswered questions circling my mind. Our shared quarters aboard the station were modest, designed more for function than comfort, a small living space with separate sleeping areas connected by a shared common room. I found Corin there when I finally retired for the night, sitting quietly at a small table, staring at nothing in particular. "You did not answer my question earlier," I said, settling into the chair across from him. "No," he agreed, "I didn't. Will you answer it now?" He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I thought he might refuse entirely. Then he exhaled slowly and said, "There are things about my people that we don't advertise to new allies, not because we're hiding a threat, but because most species don't know how to react to the truth without panicking, and panic tends to make bad situations worse." "I do not panic easily," I said. "I believe that," he said, a faint, tired smile crossing his face for just a moment before disappearing again. "But there's a difference between not panicking and being ready for what you might see. I'm not ready to ask that of you yet. Not on our wedding night. Let me at least give you that much peace before the rest of it finds us." I studied him carefully, searching for deception and finding none, only that same quiet weight I had noticed since the very first moment we met. Whatever truth he carried, it clearly cost him something to hold it back, and for reasons I could not fully explain, that restraint made me trust him more, not less. "Very well," I said finally, "but do not mistake my patience for forgetting. I will have my answers eventually, Ashworth." "I know," he said simply, "and when the time comes, I won't stop you from asking." We sat together in silence after that, two strangers bound by treaty and circumstance, each carrying secrets the other did not yet understand. I thought, foolishly, that we had time to grow into this marriage slowly, to learn each other's customs and quirks, at whatever pace the fragile peace allowed. I did not know that the Kryn Ascendancy had already decided our alliance could not be permitted to survive its first week, and that the answers I sought would arrive far sooner than either of us expected, delivered not through careful conversation, but through fire. That night, as I finally drifted toward an uneasy sleep, I heard Corin moving quietly in the next room, restless, pacing in the dark, like a man waiting for something he knew was coming, but could not yet name. I told myself it was simply nerves, the natural unease of a difficult political marriage settling into place. I was wrong about that too. He was not pacing from nerves. He was listening, the way a soldier listens in the final quiet moments before a battle begins. And somewhere out among the stars, that battle was already closer than any of us realized. The alarms tore through the station 3 hours before dawn, sharp and sudden, ripping me out of sleep before my mind even registered what the sound meant. I was on my feet instantly, old instincts from years of fleet training taking over before conscious thought caught up. Corin was already awake, already dressed, standing near the door of our quarters with an expression I had not seen on him before, something sharp and focused, the tiredness gone completely from his eyes. "Kryn ships," he said before I could ask, dropping out of hidden approach vectors on 3 sides of the station. "This isn't a patrol, this is an attack." "How do you already know that?" I demanded, pulling on the emergency gear stored near the door. "Because they waited exactly long enough to be sure the wedding was finished and the alliance was official," he said. "They want to kill this partnership while it's still new enough to look like an accident of timing, rather than an act of war." A group of human soldiers arrived at our door within moments, moving with a discipline that told me this evacuation plan had been prepared long before tonight. Talia burst in from the adjoining hall, her formal robes replaced by tactical gear, her expression tight with barely restrained fear. "The council members are being moved to the lower shelters," she said. "Alina, we need to move now." I turned to look at Corin, expecting him to follow us toward safety. Instead, he was checking something on a small device strapped to his wrist, his focus entirely elsewhere, as if the evacuation happening around him barely registered. "Corin," I said sharply, "we need to go." "You need to go," he corrected gently. "I have somewhere else to be." "What are you talking about?" My voice rose despite myself. "There is an entire attack force converging on this station. You are not equipped for that. You have no armor, no visible weapon, nothing." "I know how it looks," he said, and for just a moment, something almost like an apology crossed his face. "I need you to trust me anyway. Please, go with Talia. Get to the shelters." Before I could argue further, 2 of the human soldiers moved to escort me, their grip firm but respectful, guiding me toward the evacuation corridor despite my protests. I looked back once and saw Corin walking in the opposite direction entirely, toward the exterior docking bays, toward the very direction the attack was coming from, completely alone. The shelter beneath the station was cold and cramped, filled with frightened council members and station staff, all watching monitors that showed fragments of the unfolding attack outside. I refused to sit quietly among them. Instead, I forced my way toward a communications officer, demanding access to any external feed available. "Princess Voss, I don't think," the young human officer began. "I did not ask for your opinion," I snapped. "I asked for the feed. Now." Reluctantly, he activated a display, and the image that appeared stole the breath from my lungs. Kryn warwalkers, massive armored machines built for ground assault, advancing across the station's outer platform in staggered formation, at least 20 of them, weapons systems already active, moving with the confident precision of a force expecting no meaningful resistance. And walking toward them, entirely alone, unarmed as far as any sensor could detect, was Corin Ashworth. "Get him out of there," I said, my voice cracking despite my effort to sound commanding. "Someone needs to get him out of there right now." The human officers around me exchanged glances but did not move. One of them, an older woman with graying hair and a captain's insignia, stepped closer to me, her expression calm in a way that felt almost cruel given what I was watching. "He told us not to intervene," she said quietly. "He was very clear about that before the ceremony even started. If we send support in, we risk more lives than we save." "You are talking about sacrificing him," I said, disbelief and anger tangled together in my chest. One man against 20 warwalkers is not a fight, it is an execution. The captain's eyes met mine, steady and unreadable. "Watch the feed, princess. I don't think you understand yet what you're about to see." I turned back to the monitor, every instinct screaming at me to look away, certain I was about to witness the death of the man I had married only hours before. Instead, what I witnessed rewrote everything I thought I understood about the universe. The lead warwalker fired first, a concentrated energy blast designed to level small buildings, aimed directly at the lone figure standing in its path. I flinched, certain the feed was about to show nothing but scorched platform where a person had once stood. Corrin was simply no longer there when the blast landed. The feed struggled to track him, the image blurring as he moved with a speed that made no logical sense for a living body, appearing instead at the base of the warwalker's leg joint a fraction of a second later. His hand connected with the machine's armored plating, and the entire warwalker folded sideways, its leg support crumpling like it had been struck by something far heavier than any single strike should have carried, crashing down onto the platform with a force that shook the camera feed itself. I heard myself make a small, strangled sound of disbelief. The remaining warwalkers adjusted formation immediately, clearly recalculating whatever threat assessment protocol they had begun this assault with, opening fire in a coordinated barrage meant to overwhelm a single target through sheer volume. Corrin moved through the assault like water moves around stone, never quite where the weapons expected him to be, closing distance between himself and each machine with a speed that made the entire feed struggle to keep pace with him. He did not carry a weapon. I searched every frame of that feed for some hidden device, some piece of advanced technology explaining what I was seeing, and found nothing. Whatever force allowed him to tear through armored war machines with his bare hands belonged entirely to him, not to any tool he carried. One by one, the warwalkers fell. Some collapsed from direct strikes to their joints and support structures. Others were simply overturned entirely, flipped aside like discarded toys, their weapon systems rendered useless the moment they lost stable footing. Through it all, Corrin's expression, visible in brief, clear moments when the camera caught him directly, remained almost distant, focused but strangely calm, like a man performing a task he had done countless times before and found no particular satisfaction in repeating. "This is not possible," I whispered, more to myself than to anyone listening. "This cannot be one person." "It is," the captain said quietly beside me. "It always has been." I turned to her, desperate for some explanation that made sense of what I was witnessing. "What is he? What are your people, that you would send someone like this, disguised as a diplomat, married into a foreign house like an ordinary man?" The captain hesitated, choosing her words with visible care. "We don't disguise him, princess. We restrain him. There's a difference. Out there, tonight, he's not hiding anything. He's simply doing what we asked him never to do openly, unless there was truly no other choice left." On the monitor, the last of the warwalkers attempted retreat, its remaining systems clearly registering that continued engagement meant certain destruction. Corrin did not pursue it. Instead, he stood motionless amid the wreckage of the assault force, watching the retreating machine disappear beyond the platform's edge, his shoulders rising and falling with what looked, even through the grainy feed, like exhaustion far deeper than physical effort alone could explain. The shelter around me had gone almost completely silent, every council member and staff member staring at the same monitor, the same impossible scene, the same quiet, unarmed man who had just single-handedly dismantled an entire assault force sent to destroy our fragile new alliance. Talia found my hand and gripped it tightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Alina, do you understand now why the humans stood back, why no one tried to stop him?" "They were not protecting him from the Kryn," I said slowly, the realization settling into my chest like cold water. They were protecting the Kryn from him, and they were protecting everyone else from having to witness what he truly is. The captain beside me nodded slowly. We've spent years building protocols around exactly this scenario: how to introduce him to new allies without causing panic, how to manage situations where his abilities become necessary. Tonight was never supposed to happen, not this soon, not during a wedding meant to symbolize peace, but the Kryn forced our hand, and he did what he always does when the people he's sworn to protect are threatened. I could not look away from the monitor, watching Corin finally lower his hands, watching him turn slowly to look directly into the nearest camera, as if he somehow knew exactly where I was watching from. Even through the grainy feed, I could see something in his expression that had not been there during our wedding ceremony, something raw and unguarded, an exhaustion that went far beyond the physical. He had told me, on our wedding night, that peace offerings were rarely simple things. I understood now, in the aftermath of a battle no single being should have survived, let alone won so thoroughly, exactly what he had meant. Humanity had not offered me a diplomat. They had offered me a weapon capable of erasing armies, wrapped carefully in the shape of a quiet, tired man, sent to marry me not because they feared losing the war against the Kryn, but because they feared what it would cost everyone involved if the true nature of that weapon was ever revealed too soon, too carelessly, without the careful structure of an alliance to contain the fallout. When the all-clear finally sounded through the station, I did not wait for an escort. I pushed past the soldiers guarding the shelter entrance, ignoring Talia's calls behind me, moving as quickly as my legs would carry me toward the docking platform where the battle had taken place only minutes before. I needed to see him. I needed to understand, with my own eyes and not through the distance of a monitor feed, exactly what I had married and exactly what our alliance had truly cost him to protect. The platform, when I reached it, looked like the aftermath of a war, fought and won in the span of a few violent minutes. Twisted metal from the fallen warwalkers lay scattered across the scorched deck, still smoking in places, the air thick with the acrid smell of overheated machinery. And in the center of it all, standing perfectly still amid the wreckage, was Corin, staring down at his own hands as if he did not fully recognize them. He looked up when he heard my footsteps, and for the first time since we had met, I saw something close to fear in his expression, though not fear of the battle he had just survived. "Alina," he said quietly, "you shouldn't be out here." "Neither should you have been alone," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and something far more complicated that I did not yet have words for. 20 warwalkers, Corin. You faced 20 warwalkers with your bare hands, and you did not even carry a single weapon. "I didn't need one," he said simply, and the plainness of the statement, delivered without arrogance or pride, unsettled me more than any boast could have. I stepped closer, ignoring the wreckage crunching beneath my boots, until I stood directly in front of him. "What are you?" I asked, the same question I had asked hours earlier, but this time demanding an answer neither of us could avoid any longer. He looked at me for a long moment, and I watched him decide, finally, that the time for careful silence had run out. "I'm the reason my people chose peace as their first option instead of their only option," he said quietly. "And tonight, you saw what happens when peace stops being enough." I stood there among the wreckage, letting his words settle over me, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. The scorched metal beneath our feet still ticked and cooled, small sounds in the aftermath of something far too large to process quickly. I thought of every strange detail I had gathered since our first meeting, the hushed conversations, the careful distance his own people kept, the aide's warning that very few ever saw him as anything beyond his capability. All of it arranged itself now into a single, undeniable shape. "How long have you carried this?" I asked quietly, "without anyone treating you as simply a person first?" He was quiet long enough that I thought he might not answer at all. "Longer than I can easily explain," he finally said, long enough that I stopped expecting anyone to try. Somewhere beyond the platform, emergency lights continued sweeping across the damaged docking bay, and distant voices called out over comm channels, coordinating repair crews and medical teams. Yet in that moment, Surrounded by the ruin of an assault force that should have overwhelmed any single defender, it felt as though the two of us stood entirely alone, the only two people in the galaxy who understood exactly what had just happened, and exactly what it meant for everything that came after. The medical bay aboard the station buzzed with quiet activity as human staff moved between damaged systems and injured personnel, though I noticed none of the injuries belonged to anyone caught in Corrin's path. The war walkers had done their damage before he intercepted them, striking at outer defense turrets and a handful of unarmored maintenance workers who hadn't reached shelter in time. Not a single casualty, human or Sevri, had come from the man who single-handedly ended the assault. I sat beside Corrin while a medic checked him over, more out of protocol than necessity, since he showed no visible injury despite the violence he had just walked through. My own people gathered near the entrance of the bay, kept at a respectful distance by station security, though I could see them watching through the open doorway with expressions I recognized immediately. Fear, not the fear of an enemy approaching, but the fear of discovering that an ally possessed power far beyond anything anyone had prepared them to understand. General Darren Kell, the highest-ranking Sevri officer present at the station, pushed his way to the front of the gathered crowd, his expression a careful mask over what I suspected was genuine alarm. He had led fleets against the Kryn for over a decade, a man not easily shaken by displays of force. Yet when his eyes settled on Corrin, I saw his jaw tighten in a way I had never witnessed before, not even during our worst defeats in the war. "Princess Voss," he said formally, though his gaze never left Corrin. "The Council requests an explanation, immediately." "The Council will receive one," I said, standing to meet him. "But perhaps consider gratitude before demands, General. That man just destroyed an assault force that would have otherwise killed everyone sheltering beneath this station, myself included." "That man," Kell said slowly, "is not what we signed a treaty with. We signed an alliance with a species we believe to be roughly comparable to our own capabilities, perhaps with useful technology to offer. We did not sign an alliance believing one of their representatives could single-handedly erase an entire war machine assault without so much as raising a weapon." Corrin remained quiet through the exchange, allowing the medic to finish a final scan before standing slowly, his expression carefully neutral despite the accusation hanging in the air. "I understand the concern, General," he said, "and I understand this changes how you see the terms of our alliance. But nothing about tonight changes the agreement we made. I am not here to conquer your people or replace your command. I am here because I made a promise to protect Alina, and by extension, everyone under her protection. A promise from someone with your capabilities is not comforting, Ashworth," Kell said sharply. "It is terrifying. Do you understand that? An entire war machine assault, gone, in minutes, and you tell us to simply trust that you'll always choose restraint." "I don't ask you to trust it blindly," Corrin said, his voice steady, despite the tension filling the room. "I ask you to look at every moment before tonight. I have been present at this station for less than 2 days. I have had ample opportunity to demonstrate exactly what you fear, and instead I chose to stand quietly at the edge of a wedding ceremony, unnoticed, exactly as I have been trained to do since I was young. Tonight was not a choice I wanted to make. It was the only choice left once the Kryn decided this alliance could not be allowed to survive its first week. I watched the exchange unfold, torn between defending the man I had married only hours earlier and understanding the very real fear now spreading through my own people. Kell was not wrong to be afraid. An entire military doctrine, an entire understanding of relative strength between civilizations, had just been upended in the span of a single skirmish. Every strategic assumption my people held about the balance of power in this new alliance now needed complete reconsideration. "How many more of you exist?" Kell asked quietly, "with this same capability?" Corrin hesitated, and in that hesitation, I understood that whatever answer he was about to give carried weight far beyond a simple number. "Fewer than you might fear," he said finally. "More than most species would find comfortable. My people learned, generations ago, that abilities like mine come with consequences if left unchecked. We built structures around individuals like myself, specifically to prevent uncontrolled use of this kind of strength. Marriages like this one, quiet postings, careful integration into ordinary diplomatic roles, all designed to let people like me live without becoming what we're capable of becoming. And what exactly are you capable of becoming? Kel pressed. Corin's expression darkened slightly, the first true shift of emotion I had seen from him since the battle ended. Someone your species would have far more reason to fear than the Kryn ascendancy ever gave you, he said quietly. Which is precisely why containment protocols exist, and precisely why I've spent years living exactly the kind of quiet, unremarkable life you saw before tonight. The room fell silent at that admission, the weight of his words settling over everyone present. I found myself studying him with new eyes, seeing past the tired, quiet exterior to something far more complicated underneath, a being who had spent his entire life deliberately suppressing the full scope of his own strength, not because he lacked the ability to embrace it, but because he understood the danger of doing so without restraint. Later that night, after the council had reluctantly agreed to continue honoring the alliance despite their fear, after General Kell had left with far more questions than answers, I found Corin alone on an observation deck overlooking the stars, his posture heavy with an exhaustion that seemed to reach far deeper than the physical battle he had just survived. "You could have told me all of this before the wedding," I said, joining him at the viewing window, "before I signed an agreement binding my life to yours." "Would it have changed your answer?" he asked, not turning to look at me. I considered the question honestly before responding. "I do not know," I admitted. "Perhaps I would have refused entirely, terrified of exactly what my people are terrified of now. Or perhaps I would have understood sooner what your restraint actually costs you, and respected you for it, rather than fearing you because of it." He finally turned to look at me, something vulnerable flickering across his features. "I wanted the chance to be your husband before I became something else in your eyes," he said quietly, "even if it was only for a single day. I've spent my entire life being seen as a weapon first and a person second, by my own people as much as anyone else. I thought, foolishly perhaps, that marrying into your house might give me one brief moment where someone saw me as simply a man trying to keep the people he cared about safe." Something in his voice, raw and unguarded in a way I had not yet heard from him, softened the anger and fear I had been carrying since the battle ended. I thought of the quiet way he had spoken his vows, the plain honesty in his promise that nothing would reach me without going through him first. I had mistaken it for diplomatic performance. It had never been performance at all. "You are not simply a weapon to me, Corin," I said quietly. "Not anymore. But you cannot ask me to pretend I am not afraid of what I witnessed tonight. 20 warwalkers, destroyed by your hands alone, without a single visible wound left on you. That is not something I can simply set aside because you wish to be seen differently." "I don't ask you to set it aside," he said. "I only ask you to see all of it, the strength, and the reason I've spent my whole life trying not to use it unless there's truly no other option left." We stood together in silence after that, watching the stars beyond the station's shattered outer platform, the wreckage of the battle still being cleared away by maintenance crews below. I thought of my father, standing on the palace balcony as our cities burned, telling me this marriage was the last card our people had left to play. I understood now, far more clearly than I had that terrible morning, exactly how much larger that card truly was. We had not simply gained an ally in this war. We had bound ourselves to something capable of ending it entirely, carried quietly within the body of a man who wanted, more than anything, simply to be seen as more than the destruction he was capable of causing. The Kryn ascendancy, I suspected, had no idea what their attack tonight had truly revealed, not just to my people, but to every civilization watching this fragile new alliance take shape. They had meant to kill a partnership in its infancy. Instead, they had exposed exactly why humanity had been so careful, so quiet, so deliberately unassuming in every interaction since first contact began. They were not simply offering peace out of weakness or uncertainty. They were offering peace because they could afford to, because the alternative, when finally unleashed, looked exactly like what I had witnessed on that platform tonight. An entire assault force, erased in minutes, by a single man who genuinely wished he never had to prove it. I reached for Corin's hand, and for the first time since our wedding began, he did not flinch away from the contact, as if surprised that anyone would still choose to stand this close to him after seeing what he was capable of. "Whatever comes next," I said quietly, "we face it together. Not as a princess and her contained weapon, as partners, exactly as our vows promised." He looked at me for a long moment, something like relief breaking through the exhaustion in his expression. "I did not expect that answer," he admitted. "Neither did I said honestly, "but I find I mean it anyway." Outside, the stars continued their slow, silent turn, indifferent to the war still raging beyond this fragile station, indifferent to the alliance now reshaped forever by a battle that should have taken an army to survive, and had instead taken only one man, standing perfectly still amid the wreckage of everything sent to destroy him. News of the Kryn Ascendancy's surrender reached us less than a full day after the battle on the platform, arriving so quickly that even our most experienced diplomats struggled to process the speed of it. I remember standing in the station's main command hall when the message came through, watching the color drain from the faces of Kryn representatives who had arrived under a flag of truce, their voices trembling as they read terms of surrender they had clearly hoped never to need. "They are asking for unconditional terms," Talia said beside me, disbelief coloring every word. "Not a ceasefire, not a negotiated peace. Full surrender, Alina, after a single skirmish." "It was not a single skirmish to them," I said quietly, watching the Kryn delegation through the reinforced glass separating the command hall from the meeting chamber beyond. It was proof of something they had spent this entire war refusing to believe existed, that humanity's quiet, unassuming presence in galactic affairs was not weakness. It was restraint. The Kryn delegation leader, an older commander named Resic Thane, whose reputation for ruthless efficiency had haunted our fleets for years, looked smaller somehow through that glass, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with his physical presence. When he finally spoke, requesting to address our joint council directly, his voice carried none of the cold confidence that had defined every previous exchange between our peoples. "We attacked your alliance believing it to be an act of political theater," he said, addressing both Sevri and human representatives seated across the negotiation table. "We believed the marriage a symbolic gesture meant to intimidate us through appearance alone, with no substance behind it. We were wrong, and our error nearly cost every soldier we sent into that assault their lives, when in truth it cost them nothing at all, because your representative chose restraint even in victory." I glanced at Corin, seated quietly beside me at the table, his expression carefully neutral despite the weight of the moment. He had not killed a single Kryn soldier during that battle, I realized then, understanding fully for the first time exactly how deliberate his restraint had been even in the chaos of combat. 20 warwalkers destroyed, disabled through strikes aimed precisely at joints and support structures rather than the crews inside them. He had ended an assault force without ending a single life, a distinction that had clearly not escaped the Kryn commander's notice. "You could have killed every soldier in that assault," Thane said, looking directly at Corin now. "Your species could have ended this war in an afternoon, at any point over the last decade, simply by revealing what you were truly capable of. Why did you wait? Why allow this war to continue as long as it did, if peace was always within your reach?" Corin was quiet for a long moment before answering, choosing his words with the same careful deliberation I had come to recognize in him. "Because peace bought through fear alone rarely lasts," he said. "If we had simply demonstrated our strength from the beginning, we would have ended one war and started a dozen others, born from resentment and terror rather than genuine resolution. We wanted alliances built on trust, even when trust took longer, even when it cost more in the short term. Force was always our last option, never our first." Thane studied him for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes that looked almost like grudging respect. "A costly philosophy," he said finally. Perhaps, Corin agreed, but a war ended through fear alone simply waits quietly for its next opportunity to resume. I would rather end this one properly, with terms both our peoples can live under without needing to look over their shoulders for the next attempt at revenge. The negotiations that followed stretched over several long days, complicated by the sheer scope of a surrender no one had expected to need to plan for so quickly. I found myself present at nearly every session, partly out of duty as the newly bound representative of the Sevri Dominion, and partly because I could not shake the need to watch Corin navigate this new reality, this world in which every remaining power in the region now understood exactly what humanity was truly capable of, and had chosen, deliberately, not to use for generations. My own council, once fearful of the power now bound into our alliance, slowly began to shift in their reactions as the days passed. General Kell, who had confronted Corin with open suspicion on the night of the battle, approached me privately during a break in negotiations, his expression far less guarded than before. "I owe your husband an apology," he said quietly. "I judged him as a threat before understanding what kind of restraint that threat had already shown, for longer than I initially realized. A lesser man, given that kind of strength, would have used it to dominate every negotiation since first contact. He chose otherwise, consistently, even when it would have made his own life far simpler to do differently." "You are not wrong to have been afraid, General," I said. "I was afraid too, watching that battle unfold. I still am, in smaller ways I suspect will never fully disappear. But fear and respect are not mutually exclusive things. I have learned that much, at least, over these last several days." Kell nodded slowly, something like understanding passing between us. "The Council will formally recognize the alliance as permanent," he said, "not simply out of necessity anymore, but out of genuine confidence in what this partnership offers our people going forward." That is more than I expected to say only days ago. As the final terms of the Kryn surrender were signed, I found myself standing beside Corin once more, on the same observation deck where we had spoken honestly for the first time following the battle. The wreckage below had long since been cleared, the platform restored to its original condition, though I suspected neither of us would ever look at that space again without remembering exactly what had happened there. "Your people are calling you something new now," I said, watching him carefully. "Something beyond diplomat, beyond husband. I have heard the words spoken quietly among both delegations these past few days." "I've heard it too," he said, a faint, tired smile crossing his face. "Guardian, some of them are saying, as if that title makes any of this simpler to carry." "Does it not?" I asked. He considered the question honestly before answering. "Titles rarely change what a person actually has to carry," he said. "They only change how other people choose to see the weight of it. I would rather be seen as your husband first, Alina, and whatever title comes with that second, if it comes at all." I moved closer to him, studying the tired lines around his eyes, understanding now exactly what that exhaustion truly represented. Not simply physical fatigue from a single battle, but the accumulated weight of a lifetime spent deliberately restraining a strength capable of reshaping entire conflicts in moments, choosing patience and quiet diplomacy over easy displays of dominance, again and again, for reasons that went far deeper than simple strategy. "I confronted you that night demanding to know what you were," I said quietly. "I think I asked the wrong question entirely." "What question would you ask instead?" he asked, curious despite the exhaustion still visible in his posture. "Not what you are," I said, "but why you chose to become someone capable of this much restraint, when the easier path would have simply been to let your strength define you completely, the way my own people initially feared it might." Something in his expression softened at that, a warmth breaking through the careful neutrality he had maintained through every negotiation session over the past several days. "Because strength without restraint isn't protection," he said. "It's just another kind of threat, no different from the wars it claims to end. I didn't want to be another threat in your life, Alina. I wanted to be the reason threats stopped reaching you at all." I thought of my father's words on the night this marriage began, describing our union as the last card our people had left to play, a desperate gamble born from a war we could not otherwise win. Standing there beside Corin, watching the stars turn slowly beyond the repaired platform, I understood now that we had not simply played a card in a losing game. We had uncovered an entirely different game altogether, one where strength measured itself not by how much destruction a being could cause, but by how much restraint that same being was willing to carry, quietly, patiently, for the sake of people who did not yet understand exactly what protection they had been given. The peace treaty formally ending our war with the Kryn Ascendancy was signed 3 days later, in a ceremony far more elaborate than our small, hurried wedding had been, attended by representatives from a dozen neighboring civilizations who had all quietly requested observer status once word of the battle spread across the region. I stood beside Corin throughout the entire proceeding, no longer viewing him as the quiet, unassuming stranger I had first met in that plain gray meeting room, nor purely as the devastating force I had witnessed dismantling an entire assault fleet with his bare hands. I saw him now as both things simultaneously, the quiet restraint and the overwhelming strength existing together within the same person, each one giving meaning to the other. A man capable of ending wars in minutes, who chose instead to spend years standing quietly at the edges of diplomatic gatherings, waiting patiently for peace to work first, keeping his true nature carefully contained until the moment containment itself would have cost more lives than revelation. That night, long after the formal ceremonies ended and the observing delegations departed for their respective territories, I found myself back on that same observation deck, Corin's hand resting quietly in mine as we watched the stars turn above a region of space no longer torn apart by open war. "My people married me to a peace offering," I said softly, breaking the comfortable silence between us. I did not understand, that first terrible morning, that peace offerings capable of ending wars entirely are rarely simple things to hold. "No," he agreed quietly, "they rarely are. I am glad, regardless," I said, turning to look at him directly, "not simply because the war has ended, though I am grateful for that beyond words. I am glad because somewhere between that first meeting and this quiet night, I stopped seeing you as either a diplomat or a weapon, and started simply seeing you as Corin, my husband, exactly as our vows promised, strength and restraint held together in a single person I am genuinely proud to stand beside." He turned to face me fully then, something deeply vulnerable and profoundly grateful passing across his features, an expression I suspected very few people in his long, careful life had ever been given the chance to witness. "That is all I ever wanted anyone to see," he said quietly. "Thank you for finally seeing it." Beyond the observation deck, the stars continued their slow, indifferent turn, unaware of the war they had witnessed end, unaware of the quiet man who had ended it without taking a single life, unaware that somewhere in the vast, uncertain future stretching ahead of two very different civilizations now bound together by more than simple treaty, a princess who once feared she was being sold as a bargaining chip had instead found something she never expected to find in a marriage born entirely from desperation and war. She had found a partner, and in him she had found the quiet, restrained proof that the greatest strength in the galaxy was never the ability to destroy everything standing in your way. It was the discipline to choose not to, until the very last moment, when choosing anything else would have meant losing everything worth protecting in the first place.